Kash Patel stepped into the role of FBI director, promising sweeping changes, but now his leadership is facing one of its toughest legal tests. What started as a dispute over official government records has evolved into a high-stakes courtroom battle, where a federal judge is now openly questioning whether the FBI has actually complied with lawful court orders. The stakes here have become far greater than a simple document request. Since taking charge of the Bureau, Patel has overseen a series of major personnel changes. Numerous officials connected to investigations involving January 6th, as well as cases related to former President Donald Trump, were removed from their positions. Supporters viewed this as much-needed reform, while critics argued it was politically motivated. But either way, these decisions quickly drew national attention.
And now, those actions are being examined in federal court before Judge James Boasberg, a judge who is already quite familiar with several high-profile cases involving the Trump administration. During recent proceedings, the judge expressed growing frustration over what he described as repeated failures to provide records that the court had explicitly requested. Government lawyers frankly struggled to explain why key documents hadn't been produced. As the questions continued to mount, the judge delivered a stark warning. Ignoring court directives is not something the legal system treats lightly.
Section 1. The Courtroom Clash: Records, Compliance, and the Federal Bench.
This courtroom clash over records immediately transformed the narrative. The attention shifted squarely toward whether senior officials were actually respecting the authority of the federal courts. At its core, the issue we're looking at is whether government agencies are obligated to fully cooperate when a federal judge orders information to be released. Legally speaking, the answer is straightforward. Court orders are expected to be followed, unless they are successfully challenged through the legal process. If they aren't followed, we start looking at contempt proceedings. This is a formal process that carries serious legal consequences for officials who fail to comply with judicial orders. As these hearings continued, government attorneys appeared unable to give clear answers regarding the missing records. That uncertainty only intensified the judge's concerns, leading to even stronger warnings from the bench. Now, the nation's highest law enforcement agency is under intense judicial scrutiny, with every filing, every explanation, and every deadline being closely monitored.
Section 2. The Personnel Lawsuits: Allegations of Political Retaliation.
While that courtroom battle over record was unfolding, another major controversy began to surface. Former and current FBI officials started describing an internal culture they believed had changed dramatically after Patel took office. Newly filed lawsuits paint a picture of mounting pressure inside the Bureau. According to the complaint, senior leaders were instructed to remove experienced agents whose only connection was their past work on investigations involving Donald Trump or the January 6th Capitol attack. One of the central figures mentioned in these filings is Brian Driscoll, who temporarily led the FBI just before Patel's confirmation. Court filings claim Driscoll resisted demands to dismiss certain employees because he believed the requested actions lacked a lawful basis. Instead of just carrying out the orders, he reportedly warned that removing career agents without legitimate justification could expose the Bureau to major legal challenges. Another key example cited is Christopher Meyer, an FBI pilot and military veteran. According to the complaint, online accusations from political activists falsely linked him to the search of Mar-a-Lago. Despite internal reviews reportedly finding absolutely no evidence to support those claims, the lawsuit alleges that pressure continued to build for disciplinary action against him.
Section 3. Politics versus Reform: Competing Narratives Inside the Bureau. As these legal filings continue to drop, they reveal an increasingly divided picture of the Bureau. The complaint argues that some officials actively attempted to protect experienced personnel from what they viewed as politically motivated removals, warning that these dismissals could severely damage morale and weaken confidence in the FBI's independence. So on one side, critics are portraying an institution where seasoned investigators were allegedly pushed aside simply because of the cases they previously handled. They argue that experienced agents, people who spent decades serving the FBI, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny for assignments they had been ordered to carry out years earlier. On the other side, however, supporters defend these actions as necessary institutional reform and standard leadership changes. They make the point that leadership changes are entirely common whenever a new administration takes office, maintaining that the Bureau desperately needed reform and that these personnel decisions were made to restore public confidence, not to punish individuals.
When you map out the timeline of these events, it contrasts pretty sharply with initial expectations. During his Senate confirmation hearings at the start of his tenure, Patel repeatedly pledged that political considerations would never influence decisions involving career FBI employees. But as we move down the timeline, from initial document requests just weeks later to the recent judicial warnings and now the personnel lawsuits, critics argue that the allegations contained in the lawsuits appear difficult to reconcile with those early promises. Supporters naturally maintain that the accusations remain completely unproven and deserve to be properly tested in court.
Section 4. Grand Juries and Indictments: Systemic Legal Debates. Just as the personnel controversy continued to dominate the headlines, another critical legal issue began attracting widespread attention. This time, the discussion centered on exactly how federal prosecutors obtain criminal indictments, which essentially widens the lens on the overall legal landscape surrounding these cases. This debate intensified after a federal judge openly discussed concerns regarding the use of grand juries during court proceedings. It really boils down to this question: are existing legal procedures for federal criminal charges being used as intended? Critics argue that if prosecutors simply seek another venue after failing to secure an indictment, it raises some very difficult questions about whether the process is functioning fairly. Others strongly disagree, pointing out that prosecutors often have legal discretion depending on the jurisdiction and the specific circumstances of a case.
Legal experts are quick to point out that grand juries exist for a very specific reason. They serve as an essential, independent safeguard, reviewing evidence before prosecutors can move forward with serious federal criminal charges. Now, although these broader legal debates extend beyond Kash Patel personally, critics have linked them to larger concerns about leadership within federal law enforcement. They argue that public confidence relies entirely on ensuring that every investigation appears politically neutral. Supporters, on the other hand, reject that narrative completely, saying this criticism just reflects political disagreements rather than any actual evidence of wrongdoing.
Section 5. The future of the FBI. Independence and accountability. What makes this case particularly significant is that it combines two very separate questions: whether court orders were properly followed and how leadership decisions were actually made inside one of America's most powerful investigative agencies. Together, those issues have transformed what initially appeared to be a routine administrative dispute into a nationally watched legal battle. Critics argued that if experienced officials are removed because of investigations they previously handled, it could create a massive chilling effect throughout federal law enforcement. Career agents might begin worrying about political consequences rather than focusing solely on the evidence right in front of them. This touches directly on the limits of executive authority. Meanwhile, members of Congress have absolutely begun paying closer attention, knowing that any significant judicial findings here could eventually lead to oversight hearings or additional investigations that directly impact public trust. Regardless of political affiliation, most legal scholars tend to agree on one core principle: institutions responsible for enforcing the law must also remain accountable to the law themselves. Federal investigators are fully expected to perform their duties independently and without any fear of retaliation. The courtroom proceedings we're seeing right now are testing whether established legal protections for career federal employees were properly respected and whether executive authority remained within its legal limits.
Ultimately, allegations are not evidence. The court, not public opinion, will determine which claims are actually supported by the facts. Every single claim presented in court has to be supported by documents, testimony, or other admissible proof before a judge can rely on it. For Kash Patel, this means balancing two separate battles at the exact same time. One inside federal courtrooms examining legal compliance, and the other unfolding in the public arena where every single development is analyzed. Both sides will have the opportunity to present their arguments before any final judgment is reached. As these unprecedented legal proceedings unfold, the nation watches. What do you think this case goes from here?